Hey guys, did not want to keep you guys waiting, but yeah, shit happens. So let's go ahead and get started. How much have Arsenal actually improved? Let's talk about it. Hey guys, welcome to SheKnowsArsenal. My name is Jessica. I'm your host. You can follow me on Twitter at JessinoTweets. No Ashwin, it wasn't George this time. It was me. I was the one that was holding up the group. So I do apologize. It was not George this time. Yeah, shit happens, but let's talk about that less and talk more about Arsenal, because I've been waiting to do a show kind of like this where we do a deeper dive into how much Arsenal have actually improved. And that's a huge conversation going on socials right now, because the numbers are starting to match up with the performances. It's starting to match up to what we're seeing with our eyes. And, for a while, it kind of felt like we almost had to squint to see. Well, let me say this, not we. I would say me. I had to squint to see what we were trying to do. There was a period this season, not too long ago, where I loved the players. I loved our resilience. We were definitely getting more grit and fire and desire from this group, but the football really wasn't singing to me. And the underlying metrics were saying that we were really struggling in attacking. We really weren't getting enough shots. We were even struggling just to pass 5-yard passes to each other. And fast forward now, December was an excellent month for Arsenal. We struggled in January, but now coming to February, you're seeing all this, data coming out about where Arsenal are now and how we kind of measure up to our contemporaries, and it's looking good. And that's not to say that, we're just as good as everybody else, but what we're seeing on the pitch and the feeling that we get watching these guys play is matching up now with the data. And that's what we're going to go through. So we're going to talk about how culturally things have changed and how there is player buy-in, and how getting certain players out and bring it and making sure that we keep certain players and all that kind of stuff, and how Arteta's managing the squad differently to make sure that everybody feels involved. Do we actually feel like that's happening? Is that something that we didn't see in the past? How is that going to help us on the pitch in these last 14 matches? And also, what has kind of gotten us to this point where we're dominating teams, on the pitch. We're able to attack in different ways. We are attacking through the center. We have different players scoring goals. I mean, we look completely different than we did against, like, let's say, Brighton and Burnley. And that's kind of what we're going to be looking at, because when we were playing against like Brighton and Burnley, we were getting the results, but the football was stinking, right? So yeah, fun day. Let's go ahead and get started. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'm going to bring in my panel. I don't know whatever to call it, co-host or panel, whatever. Guest, co-host, panel. I'll ask them what they want to be called. Souls and George, what do you guys want to be called? Co-host, panel, or guest?
Up to you, just the guys.
Just the guys. Okay. Yeah, because I was like, what do I even say? Like, because I always am like co-host or, panel, or, and panel seems so like formal, and it doesn't feel like it's super formal, right?
I know,
I don't know.
seriously. I'm just glad that my island time seems to have transpired through multiple channels. My reputation precedes me.
It's not just
Oh my gosh. So here we are talking about, really just asking ourselves, like, how much have Arsenal improved actually? Is it an actual improvement? And before we like really get into it, we know we're not done with the season. We know that the table is the most important metric to see where you are. But in this journey, like, we kind of have to talk about things from a deep dive perspective, because that's what's fun about it. If we just say, well, where you are in the table is all we need to talk about, then what's the point of having a show? Like, what's the point of even talking about Arsenal if that's the only thing we're going to talk about? So we get it. The season's not over, but a lot of things have changed in my mind since we kind of played against Brighton and Burnley. And, I remember like Arsenal fans and rival fans coming out with these charts saying that we were like 19th in expected goals and chances, and we really weren't a great attacking team. And now, you know, in December we scored like 20 goals. That was such a good attacking, you know, month for us, and it's kind of continued on from there. We stumbled a little bit in January, but we seem to have picked back form back up in February. So George, I'll start off with you. Like, you know, if you can pinpoint one thing that you think has been the most transformative aspect of like how Arsenal has gotten to this place, like in these like 2 or 3 months, what could you pin it down to? Is it culture? Is it a specific player? Is it a formation change? Is it passion and desire? Like, what do you think it is?
Yeah, first things first, guys, I'm definitely in the storage closet of my work. So that seems to be a big topic of conversation. So I am hiding a bit. But no, in all honesty, when you do look at it, I think a lot of what we're getting is players fit. I hate to be that guy, but even when we were struggling, we had a lot of shows, right? Just in terms of attacking efficiency, like we tried to, squint through numbers about what we were seeing. But I'm always adamant that when you had the back seven, really the pivot and the back six that really, or back five, sorry, that we really know and love. When that team starts, you have a different arsenal. The ability to get up through the pitch quicker in 1v1 scenarios just flourishes when you have those people fit. And we don't have a team that's able to compete to the level of others where if one of those starting pillars are out, you don't get the same output. And I think we've seen that in different stories of the season. So if you really wanted to break it down, even when we didn't have Kieran Tierney and we were experimenting with this 4-3-3 with Thomas Partey being more on an island, if you guys remember, Mikel switched to a 2-4-4 build-up in that period in order to kind of increase presence centrally because we didn't have it. We had Sambi in there. We were makeshifting stuff. Even prior to that December, Ainsley was dropping in, if people remember, at Watford back in the pivot, right? Like we were doing things to make up for the loss that we had. And of course, Thomas Partey wasn't in great form as we went in, but there were a lot of Band-Aid fixes in us doing these things. And then when I'm trying to look at the overall structure, we've talked a lot about this on the channel where we build in a 3-2-5 ideally, and then we go to a 2-3-5. None of this stuff has changed, but the pillars that you're able to do means a lot of this stuff can come to fruition better when you've got your best, team. And I know that's not fundamentally huge analysis, but I think it's true because really when you look at this February, which kind of came after the December of really great form, I think Saka and Partey are the key there because that combined with our buildup. Now, when you really look at it, the last 4 games have resulted in, our most shots since December 2017 in a 4-game stretch, achieving 82 shots versus 89. And a big reason I remember in our kind of critique of the attacking efficiency was, well, we're seeing us get into the right positions when we did that tactical pod, but the shots weren't lining up. Why is that the case? And I really think it's just as simple as having our players fit, because when you do that, you move through the gears quicker. You end up getting far more 1v1 chances. And even though we had our first choice back 5, we didn't have the first choice midfield. And so what that meant was we were getting there, but we were getting there late. And we weren't getting there in the best times against opponents. Now what you're doing is you're combining both of those and you're seeing shots to combine with the good positions that we were seeing glimpses of earlier in the season. So I think there's a lot of the soft factors that you mentioned, Jess. It's never one factor, but if I had to put it down to one person, it really is getting those players fit. I think that for me is the biggest factor because void of the culture, which I think was still happening. And, of course we got rid of Oba and there are certain scenarios. I really think Mikel has taken a step up in that aspect and importance in the club. And it was kind of evident from the summer for me. It didn't need Oba leaving, but that kind of cements it for everybody that, you're going to get rid of your superstar player and follow through based on those morals. So like for me, the standard was already set, but he had that narrative midway in the season. So if I'm really trying to understand our progression and why, I think the fitness of those players is probably the most consistent marker of where we've seen the kind of combination of great positions plus great output for once, because one of those two is missing in all of the different chunks of the season. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it just all kind of comes down to, I mean, there's obviously like different factors, like you said, but consistency, having the same players playing with each other every week, that can only give you better results. And I just remember so many days on this show, you know, when Xhaka was not available and Thomas Partey played by himself, and then he went through that really bad patch that, you know, it was like the lack of understanding of consistency and having the same players play together. It was like, that doesn't matter. He should just be able to perform no matter what. And I think beyond Man City and Liverpool, but most teams, if you don't have certain players in your team and you don't have that consistency, they really falter. I think those teams are elite, you know, so they can cut corners here and there and make things work. But even they have players in their team where they know if they don't have those spine players, things aren't going to come off the same. And so it was a little bit strange to me. Like, spoiler alert, I'm doing a Thomas Partey show, like just all about Thomas Partey, because I just feel like he's been a big factor, but it's been that midfield, you know, just the consistency with those two and Xhaka and Thomas Partey. But Souls, just to kind of start off with, before we get into like the numbers and formations and specific players, you've spoken a lot about the cultural change at Arsenal. And one thing that has really stood out to me in the last 2 months or so is player buy-in and how everybody knows their role. And it's not just the players that play, it's the players that don't. We've seen that with players like Rob Holding. He knows what his role is. But when he came in against Wolves to get into the back 3/back 5 when we went down to 10 men, I mean, you couldn't have done that with some of the players from the past. Like, they wouldn't have been able to turn that on. Like, they wouldn't have been down for that role. You know what I mean? And now you have players like Nketiah coming off the bench and making an impact. Pepe coming off the bench, making an impact. And everybody kind of seems like they're singing off of the same hymn sheet. Has the cultural buy-in and reboot of Arsenal been just as important as getting out there on the training pitch and just doing the patterns over and over again and getting better players in the team? Is that just as important? You know, because that's something that we haven't had at Arsenal for a while.
No, 100%. When you kind of look at the culture shift, it's been aggressive. Even if you look at the sort of past 2 seasons, I think the turnaround of players has been like 18 players have gone out or something like that. In terms of, he's trying to take the clicks out of Arsenal. In, like, you know, we had, well, this is all reports and what we've been told by the media. It's, you know, the Özil click. You know, you had this click here with like David Luiz and, you know, ex like Brazilian players, and you had this little click here, and he's trying to unify the dressing room and try and, you know, play for one hymn sheet, play for each other and be united. And when you've got players who are in similar sort of stages of their career, because if you think about our recruitment is sub 22, sub 25, it's very sort of young, you know, players got a point to prove, and they're trying to go out there and do that together. They want to play for the badge. That's number one. You know, if you're looking at recruitment, it's no longer just player. Well, obviously player profiles matter and the player's ability matter, but it's also, we're kind of like conducting a non-interview with the player, kind of looking into their mindset, looking into what they do in certain situations. We look into players such as when they're down 1-0, how do they react in games? When they're down 2-0, what do they do? Are they the ones fighting the team to come back, or are they the ones who falter under the pressure? How many mistakes they're making? There's so many micro data points that we're looking at in our recruitment that it's just coming to fruition now. And when you look at, and this is no dig, because, you know, I love Arsene Wenger and I love, you know, what he's done for Arsenal, but we have to have an honest conversation. Nearer to the end of his reign, we started to become, you know, sort of a retirement club. We started to become a club where there was a lot of sentiment. There was a lot of, we became soft, if we're being absolutely honest. And Arteta's come in and he's done exactly what the fan base asked: to be aggressive, stop playing the names and start playing the players, and the players who are playing on form. And even when you look at it, an Aubameyang being, you know, sort of discarded the way he was, should have actually made us worse, not better. It shouldn't have gotten us, a December with 20 goals. It should have gotten us a December with 1 goal. It should have, lost the dressing room in reality with the influence he has. But in actual fact, it fired that dressing room up. It made them want to play even better. And that's the big difference. There's no clicks. There's no, this play is so important that we have to not listen to the manager. They are buying into the culture. They are buying into what Arteta wants. Or even if you don't want to give Arteta the credit, whether it's Edu, Vinay, Josh, whoever you want to give that credit to, they're buying into that person. And that ultimately is why we're playing. Like, that Wolves doesn't happen if the manager isn't trusted or isn't listened to. Because we've seen these situations where Lacazette came out against West Ham and, we pulled it back from 3-0 to 3-3 and said we didn't listen to the manager in the first half. And in the second half, we actually listened to him and we tried to do what he did. And that's why the results came our way. When you look at the Wolves game, that change was dramatic. It was an aggressive, big kahunas, big balls move to go and take a right back off and bring in Nketiah on. Let's be honest, everyone's looking at that substitution and goes, why the hell does he keep bringing Nketiah on? But it worked. It won us the game. And it's big decisions that are being, sort of backed by performances, not by the play. The players don't have to back it, but the performances are backing what Arteta's doing. Is definitely taken as in a positive trend. And then when you look at the players he's bought in and the whole, people talk about his silver tongue or his golden tongue, and all it is just PR and talking to players. But now we're seeing the work being done on the pitch in terms of we're in a top 4 race, probably a lot earlier than a lot of fans. A lot of fans were throwing it out. If he doesn't get top 4, he should be sacked. But let's be real, like, no one truly thought he'd be in a top 4 race right now. And that's the culture change for me. Is, yeah, there were a few, but I'm just talking a huge proportion of the fan base.
No, in general,
maybe 5th, 6th, yeah. And even rivals, let's be honest, the Premier League never thought we'd be in a. Everyone thought 6th to 8th is probably where we're going to be fighting for, but we're in a top 4 conversation. And that, to me, forget about what a manager says, that breeds belief, that breeds passion. And that Wolves game will just accelerate that. And it will, because for us, we can look at it as a minor game and it's one of those games we should have won or whatever. But for the players, that's a narrative changing game. That's a belief changing game. It's like we were down against one of the toughest teams to come back against, and we did it. And that's only going to go forward and favour Arteta and the dressing room in a positive way. That we need to listen to him. We need to buy into him. And there's no more players coming out and saying training's hard, or he's making us work hard in training, or we've got this guy who wants to win everything. Why does he want to win? We've not got that anymore. We've got players who are like, you know what? Even though they had a good game, they're like, I could have done this better. I could have done this. We've got self-critical players that critique their own performances and want to better themselves. And they've got a manager who's willing to do that for them. So I think it's just a cohesion of everyone's match made in heaven. The manager's a match for every player and the player's a match for the manager. And it's just bonding together.
I mean, Arteta said it. It was basically the word for the culture is unity. And that's basically what you're seeing. And of course, these are soft factors. And if you're not playing well and your players aren't good, none of this stuff really matters. But because we're playing well and our team is good, it does matter because it gives you more of an edge. It's kind of the reason why you look at other teams that maybe people consider to be better than us in terms of on paper, but they don't have that unity. They don't have that. And it's not just between the players and the staff. It's definitely between the fans and the players as well, because the change in the fan base, because it's not just us that are online. I think that's a big misconception is when you spend most of your Arsenal fandom online, that you feel like that is the representation of Arsenal fans. But there are match day going fans that are really behind this group, and you can feel it from the other side of your television when you're watching. You really can feel it. It's so different. There were times in the past couple of seasons where you could just feel the anxiety and the anxiousness was there. You could really cut the tension with a knife. There was a lack of
the Watford game. In the first half, I could feel it. I was like, oh, this game is going to be a 0-0, isn't it?
Yeah, lack of belief, kind of what's going to happen today, what kind of circus are we going to see today? And you can just feel that there's a difference there. And I feel like that's another reason why we've been so good at home as well this season versus like last season. It's not just fans in the stands. We've had fans in the stands before, but these fans are really backing these players. George, did you have something you want to say?
Well, yeah, because I understand the point. Yeah, maybe it's soft factors, but I think it's actually a huge factor, Jess. Like when you are looking at rival teams and you're saying perceived quality, we all may have differences of opinion on that. But one thing that we can all agree on, the culture of the rival teams are not to the standard of what we have seen here at this club. And so for me, it is a huge identifiable difference because we can talk about tactics till we're blue in the face. But for me, I always love using this in my coaching stuff where for me, talent, can't really beat hard work, ultimately, because, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. That's always been the case for everything. And, what we do as fans, we have a responsibility to the team to transmit what we're seeing and what we're receiving. It's a two-way street, right? I think the reason the match-going fans are far different from online fans is because there is an element removed being online where, you don't feel that you can associate yourself with the team. So you might believe that you can be more critical. But for me, you see what they're doing off the ball a lot more when you are as a match-going fan. You see the other 50% of the game that really, I think a lot of online fans don't see unless you're able to like really project what those tactical changes mean, unless you're actually able to visualize those things. Because for me, the reason I was so confident in the summer about top four was about these structures being in place. I could see with better quality us being able to do it, but it's really tough for fans to visualize that change. And, a lot of people are visual learners. I get this a lot, even online when I explain tactics. Me showing a screenshot of what I'm saying gets far better received than, me just saying it, for example. And that disconnect, it's very important for fans understanding where we want to go. And I think ultimately, just to wrap it up, that culture change makes us more resilient. And, when you talk about unity, Jess, you're spot on. That's been the message all season. The year before, it was trust the process. Now with unity, it's almost confirm the process. And how do you do that? You do that with unity. And it makes us more resilient in games. It makes this team more resilient to downfalls. It makes them more resilient to alternative factors that mean that we can keep our momentum. That wasn't the case last year. Whether it was a ref, whether it was a red card, whether it was Saka not being there, Emile Smith-Rowe false 9, all these things are environment things that knocked our ability to execute the plan. And what's really changed is, of course, we talk about, injuries being a little bit better. But when you combine that with the culture change, that just makes you more resilient to these knocks that you inevitably will face in the season. Now, I will say, to take that next step, you need the squad depth quality to back now up what you've done, both in terms of plan A, but also the unity, right? And when you have those three things, you get a challenging team. That's regardless of Arsenal. That's regardless of, for me, any team in the league. If you have those three things, you can compete for titles. That for me is like a very simple step. But yeah, I'm excited to kind of talk about the patterns because I don't think they're talked about enough when you talk about facetiously, well, what's the process? What's the plan?
No, and I've gathered some stats. If you guys have some of your own too that you have gathered over the last couple of months, feel free to share those as well. I just wanted to start off with something that Scott Willis said. That's O_that_crab. He's on Arsenal Vision. He does like really good statistical work for statistical data work for football and Arsenal. And basically, he was saying that Arsenal have won 29 points at home this season. They won just 28 last year. We were so bad at home last season. And they are 8 net goals better, 4 more scored, and 4 less conceded. Good to see a return to defending the home ground. And I think we're only, like, our home record is second to only, like, Man City, isn't it? It's
and
like
Liverpool
they're the only
just now. Like we're just under. Yeah, we're third though.
Yeah, and that's important. Like, I guess my whole thing, and like just to start this out, is I always look at where Man City and Liverpool are and how far we are away from them, because really they're the roadmap. We don't have to necessarily play like them or be them, but the way that they're churning out results, the patterns that they have, the amount of points that they get at home, the way that they come back and win games that they go down in, the clean sheets that they get, those are things that we need to emulate if we want to be able to get to that level. And so knowing that our home record is up there with the best of the best, I think is a good sign. And I know that we've always kind of been good at home, but we weren't last season. Like, we weren't good last season. So we're returning back to good home form, which is important. And I don't think it's literally just now there's fans in the stands. I think fans can have a negative effect on the team as well. And the positivity through the fans is actually helping this group. And we play more aggressively at home. I mean, have you guys noticed that? I mean, we're aggressive all the time, but we're really aggressive at home. Like, we come out of the gates kind of fast, don't we, Souls?
100%. We don't drop the line. We stay consistent with the fundamentals that, Arteta's trying to implement. And, for many, many months, especially at the beginning of the season, he was kind of saying to the media that I'm not telling them to drop the line. It's just a mentality thing that we need to work on. And I do think that kind of plays a hand in the way the crowd can play the team. And at the moment, there's a feel-good factor at Arsenal. And obviously, we're in this sort of top four race, and especially the fact, like, I'm not trying to separate the social media fan base from the match going fan base, but the ones who do go to the game, they're fully behind the team. And, they kind of support them throughout the 90 minutes. I was speaking to a few people that I know who constantly go to games, and have been going for years and years. And I'm hearing a completely different story from them in terms of, even against Wolves, normally in a midweek or a weekday clash, especially 8 o'clock kickoffs, people are going home around the sort of 85-minute mark, to avoid traffic and get home early. But against Wolves, people were at the stadium or in and around the stadium even an hour after the game finished. And I know that sounds like a silly thing to bring up, but it's the difference of wanting to stay there till the final whistle that we never used to do. And it's the atmosphere, it's making your home ground a fortress, and that transpires to the players. And we can see that to the very last minute, none of them gave up, and that's going to only help us. And firstly, we need to improve that home form before we can really go and take that away from home. And obviously, we know the away games are always played differently. So when you play at home, it's just a tactical thing. But as more confident we become, and the more comfortable we become playing our football, it's only going to equal good results. But you've got to be good at home first before you can even think about playing away from home and being very dominant at someone else's ground. So it's key.
All right, so let's move into the stats and the numbers and all. So talk about soft factors that are important. We'll talk about the hard factors now. So XG was a big topic of conversation around Brentford, Burnley, Crystal Palace. That run of games, that was a huge talking point because we weren't scoring a lot. We didn't score any goals against Brighton. We scored one against Burnley. It was from a free kick. What other game was in there? Norwich. We barely beat them 1-0. We could see that
2-2 against Palace, and that's it.
2-2 against Palace, and it was like you could see that the team was fighting more, that the defense was becoming more solid, but there were so many questions around the attack. So this is from Scott. Or no, this actually isn't from Scott. This is from Macro Football, but he reposted it. XG for and against at an even game state. So most of the time when I look at these little charts, I'm like, okay, is this negative or positive? How close are we to Man City and Liverpool? Like, that's really what I'd be looking at. And I'm like, okay, we're out there next to them. So George, I know you're better at explaining this stuff. What am I looking at here?
So just generally, just to give you some of that context, because before, a lot of people said the attack was the problem, but I think every time that we talked, I kept saying it was the midfield was the issue. And it's all about speed. So like when we're trying to look about what was not happening back then versus what's happening now and why we're seeing this improvement, I think it's really important to see, well, who was starting in there? What was our game state? That was the 2-4-4 that I was talking about earlier in the pod. That was us sacrificing the middle because we didn't have the presence. So we put more people there, hoping that would be enough to kind of get us through the quality gap. But it wasn't. And, the midfield wasn't doing its job, giving the ball quick enough to the attack. And therefore, that's why you didn't see the shots. That's why in that period we were slowing down in output wise. You weren't seeing those shots. You weren't seeing those goals. You weren't seeing that stuff. But the structure was there. It was the same thing. We were just trying to band-aid over an issue. Now, when we get to something like this and what you're kind of seeing overall, this XG is basically the probability of you scoring a goal is what XG is. So it's based on shot location and, stuff like that. So wherever you pick up kind of in a chart near a box, the likelihood that you will score from that position is your XG. And of course, 4 means, from an opposition team, how many of those chances are you getting close enough to goal that give you the greatest probability of scoring? That's what that metric means. And then against, it's kind of the other side, is how many of those chances are you giving up defensively? And of course, when you minus the 2, you kind of get your XG difference. And that's what we're kind of seeing here. So what we're seeing is when you really see that Arsenal are right below Man City and Liverpool, they are basically creating more chances that give you a probability of scoring while also not giving up those chances at the other end of the box. And, they're just simply the third best team behind Man City and Liverpool. Now, is this statistical difference, massive? It's a little bit. When you look at these numbers, there are differences of maybe 0.2. And that's not a goal. Typically, 1 goal is 1 XG of like a very good chance. So when you start looking at these averages, they are slight. They are, little differences. But what they do at least show you is a benchmark. And these are moving averages. So when we start discussing these things, the numbers will shift the more sample you get, right? So at this point, it might look small. But if you were to blow this up at the same rate, that's when you really start to see the end of the season differences, which result in way more wins, way more goals. So that's kind of what you're looking at this table. But this table really just shows you just the impact of having our fit players. Because when you were looking at these tables, and also even by Scott, who, I love as well, he was making some, more concerns in that Brighton position. I think the narrative down there was, look, we have some good numbers, but I'm concerned if things don't improve. Yeah. That was kind of the narrative. And then when you have this, you're like, oh, things are great. I think they kind of cut out the journey of how you're getting there. But that's kind of what this chart is explaining. And I think the reason that we're no longer doing that is all about midfield presence, which we have far more of. And we'll emphasize that in the stats that show that we're creating way more centrally. Like that should back up why we're basically seeing this change, because that's really the biggest difference, from us this season as opposed to last season. And for me, once again, it always comes back to midfield.
Yeah, because it's not just simply we're taking more shots. And I think we spoke about this. We are taking a lot more shots, sometimes not in the best spots. I remember
Thomas
when we had like weird, like we weren't really consistent in midfield, but I remember there was one game in particular. I want to say it was either Watford or Newcastle, or maybe even both. But I remember just everybody taking shots, literally. Like Sambi was taking shots, Tavares taking shots. And it sounds very like reductive, but the more shots you take, the more likely you are to score a goal. Now, obviously, you have to be in good positions and they have to be good shots. But I think having midfield control allows you to sustain pressure. And if you take more shots, you're likely to have a higher XG. And sometimes our XG doesn't match the amount of goals that we actually have, but that's how you play the data, right? You just have to kind of try to force the issue. Like Souls, for you, does this chart, like when you're looking at it, are you surprised at how good we look in terms of like XG for and against and all that kind of stuff? Or is this about what you expect?
Oh, no, I think the only surprise is how bad United are. But to be fair, they've only just come into that sort of recent constant chance creation. So I'd say overall,
but it also takes into account the chances that they give up on the other end, correct? So that's probably why they're going down a little bit more, because I think the interesting thing about the way that this is set up is it's for and against, which I think gives you a more comprehensive reality of how good you are, because you're not. If you look at just like Leeds is probably so bad because they create a lot of chances, but they just, and I think that's what's catching up United, they give up a lot of chances.
Sorry, 100%. Just really quickly, like that's why when, like no offense, like some United fans talk about the chance creation in terms of Ralph, it's void if you're giving up really great chances at the other end of the pitch. And even if you're creating far more, that's why that difference isn't seen. And that's also why, for me, it gives you a false sense of security on the game. So, and that also is the case for Tottenham as well. Like when you look at it here, In fact, Manchester United, Tottenham, and Chelsea, how you're supposed to read this graph is they roughly create similar amounts of chances. In fact, Arsenal create far better chances because they're more to the right? So the bottom, which is your denominator in the graph, basically shows how good your chances that you're creating are, or not even how good, but how likely are you to score a goal from the chances that you are creating, right? And then the one on the left, which is like the y-axis, how up or down that is, shows it on the opposite end of the pitch. And you can see Manchester United and Tottenham are pretty close together in that aspect, but they're significantly worse than, even West Ham. They're significantly worse than Arsenal, than Liverpool. Like those top on the horizontal, that's what you need to show for that metric. And, the difference is, by the way, just really quickly, is West Ham have a great pivot. Like that is why they're able to do that, and they're able to sustain pressure. So I think that's a little bit of the context when you start isolating some metrics and not others. That's where I think the gap happens for a lot of fans when they're trying to understand these numbers, because it can be really complicated.
Does this also speak to? Oh no, go ahead, Souls.
I was just going to say I'm not as surprised as because I do think we are about third or fourth. I think there's an element of I guess like obviously when you look at stats and the eye test is a big obviously debate whether which one you take over what, but I do think our football's improved. I do think we sustain a lot more pressure. We're harder to beat, and we are now obviously winning the ball a lot higher up, and especially like George says, when we have our pivot in terms of Xhaka and Partey. Even Odegaard of recent is, so he's becoming the leader in the press in the front three as well. So it's a combination of things, and Martinelli coming in, and we know he's this little he's magnetized to the ball. He wants that ball at any cost he can. So it's becoming harder for teams to even get to the point of looking at a chance, even taking a shot. So it's only working in our favor, and it's only going to get better because the turnaround is in their third, or in their sort of in the second third of phase of plays at the halfway line, and we're not really letting them get past that. And if they do, it's still tough for them to get that shot away. So I'm not as surprised. I mean, if we continue playing how we did at the beginning of the season, then yeah, of course, these data would be telling a lie. But over all of the season, yeah, I'm not as surprised. I thought maybe fourth, but I thought we are a lot closer to Man City and Liverpool than I probably had imagined.
And this is just like, let's just jump in here with the, we're not saying we're just as good as Man City and Liverpool. We're talking about in terms of the XG for and against, we're going a deep dive. Because I know that's how can you say, that's not what we're saying.
We're just as good. Let's just say it. Why not?
Well, but at the same time, I do think that this also speaks to, when there were a lot of Arsenal fans last season that were devastated at the fact that we weren't an attacking side, but we built from the back. And so because we have that defensive solidity that's been there since Arteta has been manager, this is not new. Like we're just carrying it on, as the seasons progress. We don't have this level of, solidity, but also the ability to sustain pressure and create chances without building that first, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, I kind of talk about this formula on the channel so much, and I hate to be repetitive, but it's really simple, guys. Like sustaining pressure is about transition control, which is basically like a measure of your XG against. When you really think about it, if you don't have transition control, you're giving up chances really quick, especially in this league, right? Now, when you improve technical security, that means better quality chances that you're going to create, better predictability of that. So that's kind of your XG4. When you combine the two, you get this beautiful line. And, when you really look at like line graphs, this is basic maths, right, guys? Like when you want to be in that diagonal trend, you don't want to be too far or horizontal left or right. And the last thing really, Jess, is like when you're looking at Chelsea, and I know just to defend you a bit, you get a lot of flack for saying that Chelsea aren't, great to watch necessarily. I mean, this kind of shows it. There's a very significant difference, right, in terms of the quality of chances that they're able to create. And it's really clear here. Like, in fact, compare them to Manchester United and Tottenham. There isn't too much of a difference when you're looking at this graph. The difference is they're amazing in terms of their defensive. And if you want to call that defensive football, it's not really a knack, but it is true. Like factually, their ability to keep out chances is what's got them to a place where they're winning games. And by the way, that's not a bad thing to say. There's a different way of winning, but it also factually is just true.
Yeah, so Scott also like showed these in a different way. So I'll just pop this up here, but more importantly to show what it looked like last season. So these are the XG, or these are the team tiers left over the last 10 weeks. So so this is the last 10 weeks, right? So December 17th through February 27th, it pretty much shows the same trend. It's pretty much showing the same trend. We're over in this area here, next to the teams that we want to be next to. Chelsea always looks a little bit strange, but they're like way over here, but we know that they're a good team. Spurs and United, and then like West Ham, who have fallen off just a little bit, but are still like chugging along. And this is showing just, so it's basically just like the same. Oh no, what is this from?
This is the overall for the season. So the one on the left kind of shows their recent form. And so from a recency bias, Chelsea
the last 10.
Exactly.
And this is through week 27.
Yeah, so you're including all the games essentially. And the reason that Chelsea are also so far ahead is because they have much better form prior into the beginning of the season. Like when you do these averages, like 10 as opposed to the other, 14 games that we've played, there's enough sample there, right? So that's why they're still ahead. But they have regressed performance-wise. They're not playing to the same standard. Now you can investigate. I mean, I don't know enough about Chelsea's situation. I would actually assume a lot of that is because of their injuries too, which is very fair. But they aren't playing to the same standard that they did earlier in the season. But ourselves, what's really encouraging here is, as a general average, we are definitely the fourth best team. But also in the last 10 games, if you want to look in the last couple months and not just do a point in time, we're very clearly, the top 3 best teams in the league. And this stuff really matters, I guess. And I know I did a post that we'll definitely get into in terms of looking at our attacking potential, why we're getting up there. But a big reason for this is that we're marrying the work that we did in the back of the pitch now with that output. Like when you see those two things, this thing of Arteta or even Arsenal aren't an attacking team is hogwash. I really push back on it. I really don't understand where it's come from. It's just narrative. It's kind of getting to the point of lying now. And, rivals, I think, are just convinced on doing that because it brings a negative connotation. I mean, Chelsea and Tuchel get this a lot, and they shouldn't. But, they get this idea that if you're defensive, you're worse. That's not necessarily true. It's really the bedrock that you use for success.
So we know that we've had some spotty form, since the beginning of the season. We don't have to go all the way back to the beginning. We know that this particular feel-good factor started in December, and it's kind of carried us through to the beginning of March. And so that's pretty much what we're looking at here. But I guess I want to ask you guys, just like in plain, like, what has been the change from December to February? I mean, we're saying we're marrying the two, but what are the specific changes? I can name one in particular, which is Gabriel Martinelli being introduced into the team again. Like, he was a big factor from December on, especially with Aubameyang being omitted from the squad. You can also look at, Granit Xhaka playing a little bit further forward. Is that a reason? Is it, what has changed? Is it just clicked, or is it something specific that we're doing? Is it the teams that we're playing?
No, because we've had a couple rivals in there. Like, they haven't been a series of, poor teams. Like, when you're looking at it, we've played everybody. We've played our rivals in that period. We've played Man City. We've played Liverpool. Like, and this doesn't show the cup games as well. But if you could add these things, and they're very similar. The biggest thing is simply Partey and Xhaka playing together, because we've seen Partey playing as a 6 and not being successful earlier in the season. Like, that was some of the irony in this, right? Like, it isn't just that, it's the two together. And it's not really a formation change for me because a lot of the structures are similar. But having those two along with generally our back four for these amount of games is for me the big deciding factor, because we've seen sample where the 4-3-3 in quotes hasn't worked, and then we've seen sample where it has. Similarly, we've seen sample when the pivot in quotations hasn't worked and when it has worked. So for me, it's not like that magic pill. It really is the fact that we've got both of them playing together, and they give us a different dimension in claiming second balls. That's the real coaching aspect of it. And when you're able to do that, you can stay higher on the pitch for longer. And that's why we're seeing us camp out in the halfway line. And that's just sustaining pressure, right? Like when you're able to do that, you're going to score more goals. You're going to produce more shots. You're going to pressure the opposition more into making a mistake when you're spending more time in their half. And that's what those two give us, right? So it's no longer like I really want to get away from this formation argument. And I've been preaching that it's zones over formations. And, we really got to get back into understanding that Arteta sees the pitch in 5 channels. He doesn't see it like these FIFA formations. So for me, when you've got all those players that can do that vision, it kind of produces these numbers, which look pretty great.
I think what people want to talk about is not necessarily that, okay, now we're in a 4-3-3, but Xhaka is clearly playing a little bit further forward, but it's also that we're pushed so much forward. So I think the obsession with it is one, that the Arsenal fan base kind of has like an obsession with 4-3-3 because the 2 best teams in the country tend to play that formation. So we want to emulate it, but also the idea of getting away from a defensive structure, because 4-2-3-1 in a lot of people's minds is playing with 2 DMs. The way that I look at it is Granit is playing a little bit more advanced and we're pushing up the pitch a little bit more and he's roaming a little bit more, but still when we go into our defensive shape, he drops a little bit, and that may change like kind of what we're looking at. For me, it changes a little bit of what we're maybe looking for in the summer. Not necessarily like we need to be going for a 10-8. We don't need an Odegaard on the other side, but it may just be a little bit different. Maybe that person needs to be able to work in small spaces, move a little bit more, be a little bit more, I don't know, mobile than Granit Xhaka. But I think, ultimately, like, it is zones, and like, who really cares what the formation is, right? Like,
it's 2, just really quickly, it's 2 systems. Okay. So what we've done is, in order to account for basically Tomiyasu not being, back in the side, we can't push one of our fullbacks up. So we've made it inverted, and we have Martinelli as the touchline winger. He's occupying that wide zone, right? And that just means if he's occupying the wide zone and we've pushed Kieran inside because we don't have that, central presence anymore without Tomiyasu, we can't commit those people to going higher up the pitch. You have to push Xhaka up, just in terms of the spaces. That's what that means. But we've also seen alternatively, like when Kieran was playing more in the wide channel, what does that mean for you? That means that your winger gets pushed inside and Xhaka comes down. But I just want to show you, like, that's the same thing. They're both the same thing number-wise in how we structure. They're just different in some of the profiles. And we do that by having 2 different strikers as well, I must add. So when Lacazette comes in the side, you're having somebody that likes to come deeper and drop in the middle, right? So when you do that, you can't have the pivot because then you have too many people in the same zones. So get one of you guys out so that we don't clog that space. And then you get this diamond that I'm sure some people have seen in Brentford. But that's the reason, like when Oba was playing, we played with a fullback wide. Why? Because Oba doesn't drop deep. He goes in between the lines. So in order to fill that, we're like, okay, if our striker isn't coming in, we can afford to have an extra body in the midfield. Let's just chuck one of our fullbacks up. That flexibility, though, for me, Jess, is what we need to look forward to in future signings. So when you talk about that player has to perform the Xhaka role, but he has to be comfortable dropping deep as well. He has to be able to do both of those things. And it just gives us flexibility because we're going to do both long term.
Well, what I do like is now Xhaka in this particular way that we're playing it. I do think it has something to do with Tomiyasu, obviously, because he's not there. So Tierney has to stay back. And so Xhaka doesn't have to fill in for Tierney. But I like not seeing Xhaka covering for Tierney in that spot because he tends to get done. A good reference would be against Jota when he kicked him in the chest. So I think that's just kind of like it's cool to have different formations and different ways of playing, different ways of attacking. It doesn't necessarily have to be like, we're playing a 4-3-3. Oh my gosh. Like, it's just, it is what it is. But
and also, really
Oh,
quickly, Jess, also, like when you look at the Brentford stuff, how many times was Cedric in the wide channel and, Odegaard deeper? I think we get way too fixed on these things. Like a big benefit actually of us being so good is we're way better at switching. Like the team knows when to switch. So when Odegaard goes wide, which by the way, he's doing way more than he did last season, like his ability to go in to out has been very different. Like he's making much more of an effort. So when he does that, Cedric knows to stay deep and, Saka gets inside. But we've seen tons of situations kind of at Brentford. And in fact, even for the goal that, ESR scored, that was from a Kieran Tierney overlap. Like they're not set. Like these things aren't set positions. We're just getting better at understanding when someone moves, I know where I need to go. And I think that's an evolution of the team in general.
So this is what the XG tiers kind of look like at the end of last season. So you can see how much worse we were. How much worse we were. Like, I mean, obviously, like other teams, we weren't. Yeah, last season we really struggled, and you can see that the other teams were kind of pulling away, and we'll see what it looks like. It's going to be really interesting to do a data review at the end of this season to see kind of where we finish up. But we can see at the back end of last season, we were just kind of, and I remember everybody was like really obsessed with Brighton. They're up there doing their thing, the XG Kings, but they can't put the ball in the back of the net. You can see West Ham here doing their thing. So it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see where we finish at the end of the season in terms of like numbers wise, but we're doing okay. And that's the main thing that I wanted to show there. Let's see. Do we want to go through, because we're going to do the pass maps. Maybe we should do that after, George, you go over the attacking from central spaces.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, let me see if I can pull up your tweet. Here it is.
Yeah, so this little nugget, I tried to do
you want me to put up the graph? Like in full? Okay, like that?
Yeah, you know what? That'd be great because it's got my notes on the side. So this right now, I tried to do a little bit of a past, present, and future in this tweet. So clearly the present. Let's just talk about the graph. That's really big there. Very, very simple. Let's look at our metrics from this point last season. Have we improved? Because, I call this the black and white police. And, sometimes I talk about the future and what we've done to try to get there. But very, very simply, let's look at these metrics. It's very simple that we've improved pretty much in every department. And the goals conceded is the only one that's marginally different. And by the way, that's not statistical different. But then I kind of look towards the first 3 games of the season. We shit 9 goals. That's 9 out of 27, which is a third. And that's when we didn't have our team. So for me, there's very clear kind of context in that aspect. But when you really look at it, we've scored more goals. Like I've seen some people criticize that we haven't scored more goals. We scored 7 more goals at a rate that's way better per game, almost 1.6 to 1.3. That's huge. Like that is a very big statistical difference. So we are scoring more. There's your output that a lot of people are like, enough of this XG, give me the output. There it is. When you're looking at the total points now, that's also pretty significantly different, guys. That's 11 more points. And that's really what results in the table position about us being 4th in a point per game. Like that's ultimately what happened, right? Like we have kept a similar defensive record, but scored far more. Shock. That means that you've won more. I know that's the revolutionary analysis, but that's the story of kind of the present when we look at it. Now, if we look kind of just to the right, what can explain this present change? And this is what I tried to do in my tweet was, well, okay, what are some of the things that gave us those greater goals? Well, number 1, set pieces. I've heard people say that we weren't good at set pieces. That's crazy to me. We've improved over 50% year on year from Nicholas Jover's impact. That's been massive. It's been one of the biggest strengths of Arsenal. So that's a case where when we talk about marginal gains, Jess actually giving us impact, well, there it is. It lets you score almost 7 more goals. But it's not just that. Like I said before, we are starting to attack more from central areas. Last season, we were 2nd from the bottom. And this season, we are the most prolific from the center. That's a massive change. Now, some people might say, is that from Martin Odegaard's introduction? There is some of that. but we have been far better at both areas of the pitch. And from starting from center, I would argue this is a big increase in actually Thomas Partey. He's the big reason, because Martin Odegaard is actually getting a similar number of passes into the final third.
Please preach to the people. Please preach to the people. They need to understand.
Well,
I think
you guys. I think we
do
need to. I know it's tough for me, just because I think people love who they love, and so they're going to fit that narrative that way, right? Of course, but this is really the big difference. It's Thomas Partey being able to exert his influence and getting that reins from Saka, and that's what allowed us to really start attacks from central spaces. Because what's really important about this stat, though, Jess, is when you actually look at another stat that the Athletic produced, we actually don't have more possession in those areas. So we're starting attack central. That doesn't mean that we're playing central. And that's why I think people have assumed Martin Odegaard, but that's not true, because Martin plays more central. So if that was the case and Martin was the reason that we were doing it, we should see us have more possession in those zones. In fact, if you were to go kind of to one of Scott's earlier pieces, there was all those charts and they did those zones, and there was a big blue area for Arsenal in the center and kind of to the right. That blue meant that we didn't have more possession than the opposition in those spaces. So when you understand that, that means, okay, hold on. So if we're attacking more from central areas, but we don't have the possession there, that means that we're not holding on to the ball in those areas. We may start in the center, but we don't hold on. So who in your squad starts things central, but doesn't hold on to it there? That's deeper, right? So who are you going to ask? That's Ben White, by the way, who's a massive reason for this. That's Thomas Partey, who's a massive reason for this. So those are kind of the difference. And the last 2 points were simply kind of what we talked about before, just to give people an idea of the short term. So we have the second best XG difference in the last 10 games. We kind of talked about that, but also a stat, Jess, that I always love doing, because people want to say that Arsenal are inconsistent. Hogwash. Of the previous 48 games, we've earned 92 points. Jess, that averages to 1.9 per game. If you were to do that over the course of a season, you get 73 points. The historical average for top four is 70 points. We have been performing at a top four standard, a greater than top four standard, for more than just 10 games, for more than just 2 or 3 months. It's been over a year of sample. And yes, those 48 games basically take you back to the ESR introduction. So
yeah, the turning point.
It shows, like, I'm not really having the argument, like, okay, yeah, we have been inconsistent if you really nitpick tight situations, but in general, that moving average shows you we've been a top four team for over a year, Jess. Like, so this idea that Arsenal have crept up into the debate for top four, this is a big reason, I guess, why I was so confident. When you start looking at these things, like, it's lovely to have output because now I can say, see, but here, like, this is kind of the reason why I guess I was so confident of us getting top four back really in preseason. Now, look, we have to continue this. That's the last thing I'll end on. This is all really great. We've seen a lot of the past, present, and future for whys. Hopefully this answers a lot of things for people. But look, if you don't continue doing those things that make you good, you're going to be bad. Shock.
Yeah, exactly. So we can see the progression here. We can see that we're clearly better. But Polymation is saying those stats show we haven't really improved a lot with over 150 million spent. I've seen this type of narrative kind of be floating around that we've spent so much money that we should be so much better than this. But what do you think 150 million should get you? Are you, like, we're clearly seeing an improvement. Do you think that we should see more, or is this kind of what you expect? Because I don't know. I feel like we kind of also haven't gotten into 2022 where, like, standard good players cost you between 30 and 40 million, so we're talking about, like, unless you're spending 300 million in a window and you're buying like 3 world-class players, even at that, you're not going to get this. It's not early 2000s where if you'd spent this amount of money, you'd expect to win the league. You know what I mean? And other teams spent money too. So what do you think about that comment?
I think it's disingenuous, really, because you've got to understand the starting point first and understand where the squad was before you spent that 150 million. We're not Man City and then adding £150 million worth of talent into the pool, where Arsenal Football Club that just got rid of about 13 to 15 players to then replace them with £150 million worth of players. So I think I think the whole notion of, oh, we spent £150 million, so we should be competing for the title, is a bit disingenuous for me, because
It's a little 1 + 1
yeah,
just equals
equals
2,
two.
and sometimes
Like
it
it's
it
not as
don't.
simple as that. You need
Yeah.
to understand the position of the squad. You need to understand the types of players that we needed to bring in. We needed squad depth, but also staple pieces within the starting 11 in certain areas, such as a goalkeeper and a centre back mainly, and then obviously a right back, which we all got starting positions for. And then obviously Lokonga and Tavares coming in to kind of fill a hole in the team, in the squad, where Thomas Partey was primarily getting injured in crucial points of the season. And then obviously with Tierney being the same, thankfully they've been a lot better this season in terms of not picking up long-term injuries. So I think when people say that, I just think they haven't evaluated the club properly. They still think we're 2003-04 invincible Arsenal, adding £150 million to the squad. Yes, there should be improvements, but I think for what we needed, the improvements enough to, because we wanted to kind of secure Europe and like top four, and I think we did enough to do that. And when you look at the current market, especially after the whole Neymar saga, from Barca to PSG, the market's not really ever looked the same. We're looking at centre backs going for 80 to 70 million pounds, and you're looking at not, I wouldn't say average players, but you're looking at players, even Ronaldo went for 30 million on the last end of his season, and he's costing nearly 400, 500k a week. Look at Rafael Varane, 30 million plus of 400k per week. So even if you look at just 150 million pounds being spent on transfers only, when you look at sort of net spend, or when you look at other teams spending, their wage structures are out of the question as well. So I just think we've done good business for the future, but we've also bought young, and we know we were buying potential and how far they can go in the future, because this £150 million could actually win you the league in 2 to 3 seasons. So for me, I think the improvement's there and we've got our money worth.
I don't even think it's a think, Souls. Like, can we just look like black and white? We're 11 points greater than we were at this point last season with the same amount of games played. We have gone from 10th to 4th. That 150 million gave us the step into top 4. Anyone thinking, because look, guys, we finished 8th. So everyone loves to throw that. If you're going to throw that argument, therefore 150 million was never going to make you 8th to 1st. Never. Like, you needed 2 periods of major investment. One, let's confirm top 4. That was the next step from being 8th, right? After that, spend big to become challengers. Like, that's a logical progression to it. And this idea that we haven't improved, I'm sorry, is just, it's hogwash. Hate to use that word again, but it's true. We have improved. I mean, the stats show it in the present, the stats show it in the future, the stats show it kind of really whatever way you want to slice it here in these numbers. We've shown that we are the 4th best team, which we weren't last season. In my mind, that's progression. Am I missing something?
Well, I guess there's no offense, Polymation, you put out big things, sometimes you get big responses back, right? And for me, when I see Arteta's spent over 300 million and he still hasn't gotten top 4. Emery got sacked for less. Arsenal fans think top 4 is a trophy. It's nothing. It's been so and so amount of time since we've won the league. These are, for me, just tropes that are being just pushed around on social media to continue to act as though the improvement is not there because you put your flag in the sand a long time ago. Like, that's what it feels like to me. Maybe it's not, Polymation, but that's what it feels like to me. 150 million spent and 11 points better off is very good. There's teams that have spent money and haven't improved at all. And when we go into the Emeryisms of he got sacked for less and he didn't get back. I don't care that he didn't get back. Do you know why he didn't get back? Because nobody believed in him. And that's on him. If nobody believed in him, if what he was saying wasn't convincing enough for them to give him money, that's on Emery. That's not on Arteta.
They gave him 140 million and he went from 5th to where we went. People to whitewash.
And let's not act like, because we talked about this yesterday. he didn't finish 5th and then get sacked. He had us falling and tumbling down the table, and then he got sacked mid-season. So I get it that, like, unless I don't know what it has to be, but when you have a rotten core of a group of players and a club that's going nowhere, and you rip it down and you start over, the improvement is not going to be something, it's not always going to be so tangible so quick. And we did have a season where, and here's another thing, is Emery and Arteta finished 8th. Arteta didn't finish 8th twice. Emery and Arteta finished 8th. That season for me is a wash. He finished 8th one time. No, we didn't see the tangible results like right there, but you're seeing it kind of come to fruition now. 10th to 4th, like getting into like top 4. Like, I don't know what 150 million is, like what you think it should get you, but that far exceeds what I thought, because like Sol said, young players that have to improve over time. You know, they hadn't played under Arteta before. We still had some players in the team that for me just weren't good enough. We're playing with a striker that doesn't really strike. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, we're doing a lot better than I thought that we would with 150 million. And for me, 150 million is not that much. Like, in the grand scheme of how the money is really out there, I just don't really think so. So for me, I feel like it goes in that basket of tropes that just keep going around social media because you convinced yourself that Arteta was crap. Like, and so now that he's getting better, instead of just accepting that we are getting better, doesn't mean that he's the Messiah, but just accept that we have improved. That doesn't mean that you're an Arteta sexual, that you acknowledge that we've improved, you know?
Yeah, just to quickly add to that as well, I think a lot of people are being very sort of hypocritical in their approach as well, because when you're seeing the benchmark potentially being hit with just top 4 at the moment, they're talking about trophies, but then when Arteta won it, when he came in, and a lot of people forget he had to navigate COVID, and this was the first time in a lot of our lifetimes that something like this has happened, where there's lockdowns, there's restrictions, you know, training was done over Teams or Zoom or whatever software they were using. He didn't get that manager's bounce, but yet he went and won an FA Cup. You know, he got the players believing that much that they went and beat 3 of the hardest teams to beat in a cup run, which is Wolves, Man City, and then going and beating a Chelsea that were on form, without having the ability to really train and dig into his philosophy. They were in their own homes training, and he navigated through that, got us a cup, which now a lot of people are like, yeah, I know we got top 4, but I'd rather win a Carabao Cup as well. And I'm like, so what do you want? Him to win trophies or for him to get you top 4? Like, it's just whatever he doesn't do is the stick they'll beat him with. And I think sometimes I keep using this, but for some people it's agendas over facts.
Yep.
There was a period, like really quickly, where when you look at this team from the summer, we had multiple holes in a hull. Okay. The whole point of 150 million was to fix the multiple holes in the hull. You want a new hull? That's title challengers. That's what the next step is to compete. You know, you don't do those things. You know, you don't buy a new house until you fix what's old, right? You got to set those foundations first, and then you can take the next step. I think it's just about us changing the metric, right, Jess? Like, everyone felt that Arteta would never get top 4 in a million years. That was the benchmark set by the summer. Now it looks like we're doing it. So those don't want to be wrong anymore. So they're changing it to now suddenly become title challengers, when that was never even the highest expectation at the beginning of the summer. That for me is where the gap, where it becomes really disingenuous, because it's not about liking Mikel, but it's about recognizing the team's improvement. Like, take Mikel away from the situation. I think I said this on a past stream with Tuchel. I think when you look at the records last season, if you look at the same amount of time, Mikel had actually better point totals than Thomas Tuchel. It was just he was at a different point in the season, right? So for me, a lot of these things are kind of contextual, but we just got to get there. And we all know that top 4 is progress at the end of the day. Like, if you really needed to wrap this thing in a bow, Mikel gets top 4, it's progress. Mikel gets top 6, you're willing to deal with it. Anything below that, he's gone. I think that's a bow that everybody, regardless of your position on Mikel, can agree to in terms of metrics. But yeah, I think it's hogwash not to look at, you know, the progress.
Let's look at passing maps. But before we do that, make sure you guys like the video, subscribe to the channel, and yeah, let's get into it. So passing maps have always, for me, since like last season, kind of looked like this. Like they really haven't changed that much. We have definitely graduated from that horseshoe of death and have gained some centrality by adding better players into the squad and just becoming a better team. I think like there was a period of time where we just did not touch the center of the pitch, and basically, you know, we've graduated from that. And I don't think that this is really that like shocking. So if you kind of look at this, what it basically says is the circle size is the number of touches that that player had. The color equals the XG change. The darker is the higher. XG chain, the darker is higher. And line size is the number of passes in between those players. And when you look at this, it just is so like obvious from what we watch on like every time we watch Arsenal play, especially since we've been like playing well since December, that look at that dark ass circle with Martin Odegaard. Look at that dark ass circle. That is a dark ass circle. It is so dark. Like he is so like involved in everything that we're doing. But what I will say is that he's nothing without the other two, because without them, he doesn't get the ball. And so that's why when you unpack it just a little bit, I still think that there's definitely like a separation in the fan base, I think, a little bit on who's the most important. Like not who's most important, but like if they were out of the team, like what we gonna do?
Whose circle is biggest though, Jess? There's only one person that has a bigger circle than Martin Odegaard if you're actually looking at this.
Granite.
I think it's El Neni, isn't it?
Yeah, Mr. Elneny
Yeah, I'm
himself.
joking,
No, it's Granit
No,
Xhaka.
we can't say Xhaka, otherwise you can't praise him. So
yeah, you're not allowed to
make a
say
new name for him.
that name. He is the he who must not be named because everybody hates him, right? But you know, factually, unfortunately, that pass map kind of shows you who's most important, right? Just like Martin has definitely stepped up. Like I think he's a player. If we're talking about improvement, probably the most improved player from last season. For me, I still think bukayo is our most important player, but most improved, it has to go to Martin. What he's really improved is his willingness to go in to out, his technical security and contact. By the way, that period where we were really struggling earlier this season, Martin wasn't doing the things that he's doing, right? Remember Brighton? Remember Palace? He was being pushed off the ball. He wasn't making runs. He was isolated. So this is an improvement that you need to kind of praise at this point, even for somebody for me who I think, you know, I think still that we can do better in that position, but he has improved massively. And I think a big reason for that are those two things. I still think he needs to improve kind of that verticality, his weak foot. You know, he really needs to improve kind of the releasing of the ball. I think that will take him to the next level, him personally. But look where Lacazette is, Jess. And if you were to also get a pass map where Obo is here, these things are what I was kind of saying before. So when I was talking about those rotations, everything's really different. It just depends on kind of where people are. Martinelli's widest here, right? That's like if you had Oba, Kieran would be there. Like, so the structure is the same, right? It's just different profiles here. And it has everything to do with, again, Tomiyasu, but also our striker. Those are the impacts about why those rotations change. So for me, when we do a recruitment, let's get somebody that can do both. But Granit is a huge miss, by the way, guys. Like, I think we all agree he is one of the most important players for Mikel Arteta's current style of play. But everybody wants us to move on from him. But replacing him is not just an on-the-field issue, which, by the way, just factually is massive. You can see this in the pass map, but also off the pitch, guys. Like, there's a huge hole there. As much as I want to replace to go to the next level, there is a big hole there that we do need to smartly do, right? And so yeah
I mean, I'm looking at this and I'm just like, it just makes so much sense. And even when you look at like, because Thomas Partey, the circle's not that big and the circle's not that dark, but the line between him and Martin Odegaard is really thick. So there's a lot of passes that go in between those two players. Exactly. And so that's a big part of our progression and like what we're trying to do when we get into the final third, because Martin Odegaard is one of our, he helps us score a lot of goals. When he touched the ball, we score goals. And Granit Xhaka, I mean, that is a dark circle for Granit Xhaka. And this is my thing with him, is that my main issues with him are, I get he's slow and stuff, but I've always said that like Arteta has really worked with him on his positioning. So him being like bypassed and stuff hasn't been as big of an issue. It's just always that brain fart, but I think he's obviously playing his best football under Mikel Arteta, and he's super important to our team right now. And so when you look at this pass map, it just makes so much sense. And I mean, I just like the way it looks. It looks so nice. Obviously, Ben White and Gabriel pass between each other so many times, but Bukayo Saka's circle is really dark, which his XG chain is there. And that just validates the fact that like goals come through him and he carries the ball so much for us. And a lot of times we build through the right-hand side with Odegaard and Ben White and Bukayo Saka, and then switch it over to the side with Martinelli and ESR, and they go off and score the goals. But if it wasn't on that right-hand side, we wouldn't have been able to do that. I think our technicians are really on the right-hand side, and then our big space runners, our threat dudes are on the left-hand side. Do you see that too, Souls?
No, 100%. I think one of the key things that we're seeing is individuals who can bring goals out of the team rather than individuals who can get themselves goals. And what I mean, the reason why I say they're big differentiating factors is because a Nicola Pepe, for example, can get himself a goal, but can he help the team if he isn't scoring? And that's the big question. And when you look at Bukayo Saka, for example, he can still be a man of the match performance, even though he hasn't contributed to a goal or an assist, because of how influential he is in phases of play, how deep he can come and pick up the ball, and he can be the pre-assist sometimes. And it's the same with like sort of Martin Odegaard at this point, even when he's not scoring, and he hasn't scored in a while, but he's still so influential in us getting the goals that we get. When you look at Lacazette, he's not the biggest goal threat, but he is someone who helps us build that play up to get to the point where we're shooting to score goals. And it's one of those where like I think the communication and the way that we play is just synchronizing a lot better, and we're no longer sort of reliant on one player, and we've got a lot more quality around the pitch or security around the pitch. We're no longer attacking from one side or the other. It's Martinelli's got his role in the team, and we know what they need to do. Bukayo Saka has his role. Martin Odegaard's got his role, and everyone just seems to have a good understanding of what they need to do, and that's why the passes are coming off. And it's no longer the sort of blame game, like why weren't you here, why weren't you there? It's more looking up and understanding the passages of play that can be played, and it's chemistry. The biggest key difference is we've got a consistent 11. There might be 1-2 changes depending on injuries or suspensions, like for example Martinelli, ESR, whether it would be like Tomiyasu, Cedric at the minute, or Tavares, Tierney, but you're not seeing sort of 5-6 changes coming in just because we want to change something. It's 1 or 2 changes, and that means the system isn't being interrupted too much, and there's a fluid motion in how we play, and it becomes second nature and sort of muscle memory to where everyone needs to be, and there's just that understanding. It's kind of like telepathic in a way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think really quickly on these pass maps, the last point that Clive makes is the thing that I've been banging on about for so long, right? It's not necessarily the fact that, if the personnel changes, the roles really don't. And when you look at Diamond or 4-3-3, who cares? They're just roles about progressing the ball. And I think when we look at that, we need to make sure that we address both ways. There are 2 ways that we do it. We've seen those rotations before, but Granit is actually a huge part to this. And, there was a great comment kind of earlier. I don't know if you were going to highlight it, Jess, but, if Xhaka, is he the reason for us being the 4th best or not the top 3?
I had it highlighted, yeah.
Yeah, like that comment for me, both are true, though. Like, he is absolutely the reason that we're the 4th best in the league, but he's also the reason that we're not top 3. That doesn't mean that it's a bad player. That kind of just means what we've said before.
We've always said we need to upgrade on him, but upgrading on him is not going to be easy, which is what people think. I mean, people were banging on about Ruben Neves. He was ass against us, guys. Like, Come on.
I hate the disingenuous part, Jess, where people love the shiny toy syndrome, which I've said before, where there's clear weaknesses, but people hate on Granite for the same things that Neves failed in that game, by the way. It's just very ironic, but
he was getting bypassed a lot. I remember that. By Granit Xhaka and Thomas Partey. 2 players that the Arsenal fan base can't stand. Strange.
Good enough.
All right. Because Ray, okay, so Ray, I hear what you're saying. Like, we're I don't think, well, I'm going to say this. We're not misunderstanding statistics. We understand them very well. And statistics do tell you where you are, and you analyze them or whatever and see how you can improve. But I think with you saying it could mean why we're doing well, and it could mean why we are not doing better. We actually looked at our statistics during the Brighton, Crystal Palace, Burnley time and highlighted how we're not just looking at these statistics and saying this definitely means that we're just all good, but we kind of have to be honest. We are improving, but we looked at the statistics as well during a time where we weren't playing well. And you could see the distinct reasons why it was showing us that we weren't really that great. And then we talked about why that possibly is, in terms of why we're not getting into better scoring positions, why building up through the back is not working, why, Lacazette versus Aubameyang, like that whole thing. So I get what you're trying to say. And maybe it seems like we're just too positive and we're trying to make 1 + 1 = 2. But really, when you look at the statistics, there's no way to really look at them without saying that we've improved. Like, especially if you looked at them a couple of months ago.
I think we did a good job of saying why, though. Like, we didn't. Like, we referenced the bad statistics. We referenced Brighton Palace and the reasons for why things have changed. And they aren't just, chance. They aren't just, oh, it fell into our lap, suddenly. Like, there was a process to get there. And the process was not always linear and up. 100%
Yeah,
agree.
Exactly. I mean, if you're catching us today and you're like, okay, we're just trying to figure out a way to make these statistics say that we are 100% improving. Well, we are, because we know that because we looked at when we were not as good.
And we were saying the same things, Jess. Like, even when the statistics were bad, I distinctly remember saying, guys, it's not the shot, it's not the attack, it's the midfield. And like shock horror, a lot of the pass maps that we're seeing about why we're good involve these players, those are the things that we're seeing. So that's kind of how you look at statistics. Again, never use one thing in isolation as like an advice to anybody to back up anything. Statistics only don't tell the story, but that's why we've tried to provide the context to show you why those statistics are showing, not just that they're good, but why are they good.
I also take into account that maybe the teams around us haven't played as well, but when you look at where we were in certain statistics and then look at them now, when you're just looking at us, we can say that we've improved. When we're looking at us versus other teams, then you start looking at, okay, well, head to head, we did this. Well, maybe they had injuries and da-da-da-da. But really, I don't think what we've looked at today, even if we try to make reasons why it's not true, like, it's just so clear. Like, I guess that's why I think it's like, it's so clear. Like, it'd be very difficult to find a way to make this that we're pretty much the same, because we're not. The eye test says that we're not the same. The results say that we're not the same, and the statistics back it up as well. So that's just kind of where I sit with that. But the True Sets Free says nothing, but thank you so much for your super chat. I wanted to highlight this because Sunil is asking, what trio do you prefer on the left half space? Tierney inverted, Xhaka, Martinelli, or Tierney overlapping Xhaka and Smith Rowe? Souls, do you want to go first?
Oh, that's tough because they both have their purpose. But I'm kind of on George on this one, where I feel like Martinelli needs to go into the middle. I think I always thought he'd be a centre forward in a number 9. But it kind of became true when I went to watch Arsenal play, and it's how heads down he was. He doesn't really look up, and he doesn't play like a winger for me. And but I do think there are games where that sort of mold or someone like a Martinelli does suit certain games, and you don't really want ESR on the left. So I don't know if I have a preference. I think if I was to have an ideal 11, I'd probably have Smith Rowe out on the left, Odegaard in the middle, with Saka on the right, with Martinelli up top. I just think you'd get the chance creation and the drive to ball progress on the left-hand side, and you still have the threat of Tierney coming in. So I'd say if I had to pick one, I'd probably pick the Smith Rowe one and then have Martinelli as a number. That's the only contingent, though.
Yeah,
This
I
is
mean,
this
shock.
is hard, right?
People won't be surprised to know where I land on this. But here, just to put this simply, you know, a lot of people know how much I rate Emile Smith Rowe, and you know, a big reason for these statistics, by the way, have come since his introduction to the team. To understate
Yeah.
his importance to this team is lunacy. When you do look at it, he is our tempo changer. We've got a lot of players that function in terms of importance in the team, but Emile Smith Rowe decides when we turn on the gas and when we don't. And you know, when he goes, the team goes. And for me, having him involved in the setup is vital. When you look at the former, two of those, Tierney and Granit Xhaka, are in positions they don't enjoy. Tierney is worse when he's inverted. Granit is worse when he's higher up the pitch. And the latter puts more people in areas of the pitch that they enjoy. And that's just fundamentally where I stand on the difference between them. They both carry their benefits, though, and they both carry differences. So, for example, Tierney may not be great inverted, but you know who is? Nuno Tavares. We've got that profile, so check. We don't have to say we don't have it. Granit isn't great higher up the pitch. Probably need that. I still think Emile can do that role, by the way, that we're asking Granit to do. You know, can he do it as well as other people? Not really, but he is definitely somebody that could do that role. But if you put him there, you need to replace the guy deeper, you know, and change things slightly. So,
well, I want whatever is going to be best for Thomas Partey. So,
yeah, and again, we come back to that kind of rabbit hole where do you see Thomas Partey best? And I think I've made myself pretty clear on how to make the best out of Thomas Partey. But yeah, I definitely prefer the latter, just because if I had to really simplify it, all three of those people are in zones of the pitch they enjoy. The first one, two of them don't. That doesn't mean that it's not successful, but they just fundamentally don't enjoy those zones. So yeah.
Yeah, I kind of agree. And I just always, I don't know, I'm always thinking about because I mean, we have to do a Thomas Partey conversation because it's just so interesting because I don't know if we're doing this because it's what's best right now or if this is what Arteta wants, but equally, I think Arteta can coach Thomas Partey into a really good number 6. I think he's done really well there. Is that the perfect position for him? Maybe not. But I don't think Thomas Partey's fall off trees. I really think people underrate him very, very much so. But I think when it comes to Xhaka, I just don't want to see him popping into Tierney's spot behind him. But equally, Tierney overlapping is where he's best, right? So I think I'm kind of with you guys that it has to be Tierney overlapping, Xhaka a little bit deeper, and Smith Rowe pushed forward. With every time Xhaka's in that left back space like this. But I just wonder where this team is going to go because some people do see Emile Smith Rowe. It's so interesting because when we're having these conversations, obviously the chat box is Martinelli can't play as a 9. Some people don't think he can. You guys think he can do it. I don't think Smith Rowe right now can play as a number 8. I don't like it when I see it, but could he? Probably, but would I rather us buy somebody? Yeah, probably, so those are interesting squad building conversations and how we see the team growing over time. But this is a really interesting conversation, but we have to get players in positions where they feel comfortable, and that's
let's get both profiles. I'm a big person that you get both. I have my own thing about what I want and what I want to see. But the one thing that I always say, if you want your bingo George moment, it's the ball carrying progressors with the elite 5-yard bursts that are versatile to both systems. That's what you want to get so that you're no longer pivoted to one way of playing. I don't want that. Even if I have a preferred way, we cannot have only one way of playing.
I think in that left 8 position or whatever it becomes, if you get rid of Xhaka, you have to bring in another passer because that's really where Xhaka shines. And I think with ESR, when I look at him in that position, I'm thinking he would be more like Ramsey, both Ramseys. It's so weird that I'm thinking of both of them more like Aaron Ramsey and Jacob Ramsey from Aston Villa. Jacob Ramsey is not really a passer, but he can progress the ball and he scores a lot of goals from midfield and he makes third man runs. And that's what I see from ESR. My issue is him going back the other direction. And can he support a central defensive midfielder? And if it's going to be Thomas Partey, then the answer is no right now. But if it's not, then maybe so. So it's an interesting conversation, I think.
It's definitely one for another video to unpack because that's a different.
That felt like a big can of worms there, really.
I definitely want to address it for people, and we'll definitely have one. But I mean, I think it's very pertinent to discuss that Joe Willock was sold, not just for money. That's a big piece that. Who looks like who, Jess? Jacob Ramsey, who you just kind of did to a lesser degree on the ball, but in profile, that's a player that we sold, a young player, by the way, on a team that was built for young players. So when you make that kind of decision, I think that speaks massively about who you want there long term, despite what you're seeing. That's my only pushback to people that are convinced they need to see this kind of 4-3-3, because in theory, right, Jess, that's the profile that people are describing right now that they want Granit Xhaka to be replaced with. We had that really nice youngster that you can mold in that profile. I just don't know why you would sell that if that was your end goal. And it had nothing to do with money for me because it wasn't great. It was 25, million pounds. It wasn't, critical to the summer transfer window. I think that was a very philosophical choice, not kind of financial necessity. So, but that's probably a convo for a different. I don't want to extend things because we've unpacked a lot here.
All right. And just before we get out of here, I'll ask the panel this, but this is a question that came through and I'd like you guys, there's about 170 of you guys watching, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and please let me know what you guys think about this. But I feel like I know what everybody's answers are going to be, but let's just throw this out here. Bissouma or Tielemans, both players' contracts are up in 2023. For him,
the
it's
one
Bissouma.
That can run.
And that's the thing. It's but there is a section of the fan base that wants to see a more attacking profile in that position. They don't want to see another CDM come through. So I think it's one where I feel like whoever we get will be a fusion of the two, somebody who can pass but can also go two ways.
Can I ask really quickly, Jess,
sure,
why do people keep talking about Tielemans, who operates best in the right half space, but we're talking about replacing somebody in the left half space? When we're looking at forget if you like him or you don't, let's take it out. Why are we discussing this? Why are people just ignoring that convenient fact? I don't think it's Tielemans per se. I think it's what he represents.
Do you want an 8-10 or do you want a number 6? Or nailed on 8? That is. And there are some people that just don't want to see a CDM walk through the door. They just don't want to see it. It's just not hitting, But Souls, where do you kind of come down on it doesn't have to be Bissouma or Tielemans because we know they both have their faults and all that kind of stuff. But what is that profile for you moving forward? In terms of who's going to be playing next to Thomas Partey? Is somebody going to come in and replace him? I've heard that as well. Okay, so we have to find a Thomas Partey replacement. Kill me now, honestly. But what do you think?
No, I'd want a more of a number 6 coming in, just because I want Partey to be the one going more forward, just because I do think he's better doing that role. When a lot of people have been saying, and even in the chat box as well, that Thomas Partey was a number 6. He was never a number 6 at Atletico. He was actually the box-to-box, the man who carried the ball forward. He wasn't... I mean, unless I've been in a coma and I've been dreaming every time I watch Atletico play, I've never seen him play as a DM. So that's just my evaluation of the way they play. It was always the person next to him, whether that was Saul, whether that was Koke, whether that was even Rodri when he came into the final year. So it was always a man next to in the midfield, and that's why I want to see a number 6, get him to be forward, be that box-to-box ball progressor. I just think he's a lot more effective in that position. And obviously a Bissouma would be the type of number 6 I want, just because I think he's got the athleticism, he's got the ball progression, he's got the ability to kind of even play those passes that Xhaka does. He is a passer, like a lot of people say. And I'm not going to say he's as good, but he's in the mold of a Busquets for me. Someone who can just read the game really well, but has the athleticism to get out of trouble, and he's very press resistant. He's doing it in a Brighton team which do lack a bit of attacking quality, and so that's the mold I like. I'm not saying it has to be Basuma, but it's just that type of profile that I'm quite a fan of. I'm quite a fan of the Busquets type player. Even to a mold of like a Frankie de Jong is probably the next step I would take, but that's for me the type of player I like.
Don't get me started on my midfield of Thomas Partey, De Jong, and Odegaard. Tears to my eyes, like in a dream state.
Got a slightly different dream from a great dish.
Dream state. Yeah, we all have our favorites and stuff like that. Personally, I think we need a passer 8 that could go 2 ways. That's what I would say. I don't know who that is right now. Yeah, you know how I feel about
opening
him.
the second can of worms that gets us into another debate, so I don't want to do that. That's another show.
And because even within us, like I still think like, like if you were gonna spend 100 million on somebody, you
Declan Rice, I would love that.
Go Declan Rice, but
give me some basket rice, man.
Couldn't we throw that to Barcelona for Frankie de Jong? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I just like him more. But like, if Declan Rice came to Arsenal, I wouldn't be like, oh my god, like you know.
You would. It would be the Ben White saga all over again. But we have to convince.
No, I like Ben White by the end of the end of the summer. Okay. At first, I was like, is he even better than Rob Holding?
George? It took a lot of like stats and we're like, come on, Jess.
I could not get it. Like I was at first, I was like, what are we doing? But I love him now. Like I really do. Have you guys given up on Aouar officially?
Heck no. I've been like his
I'd want him,
biggest
but I just
fan.
don't think it's gonna happen.
I've been his biggest fan for so long. Like if you're looking at players in the left half space that do that, absolutely, of course, I would have Houssam Aouar back here. He's a left half space.
I don't think it's just a dead conversation now because I just don't think it'll happen. I think if we were gonna pull the trigger, we would have done it now.
I don't know because he's in the last year of his contract. When you're really looking at it, I think the big goal was the striker. So when you do look at it, that's probably the biggest thing. Yeah, that's just not true. Like if you look at his statistics,
that's gonna go so much.
He's actually better. He's actually better this season, but that's another story. But if you know, if you're OGs of the channel, you know. But yeah, another one that Fabian Ruiz was another one that people are saying he was in a similar situation. Why he's so cheap is because he's in the last year of his deal. A player I really do like, a different type. He's a lot more in the Granit Xhaka mold. That if you don't like that player. Or that
he makes sense to me. I just worry about he would need to adapt, because Serie A is very lacks athleticism, and I wonder about him going back and forth. But he's a Xhaka-esque type player, but he's better than Ruben Neves, like full stop.
Yeah, for sure. And he's a more mobile Xhaka, but he'll have the same cons, just not to like the same degree, right? Again, if I was to make a smart pickup, Aou is the way to go. And if people don't think Arteta hasn't liked Aouar, the man scouted him for City for so long and was put in charge. He loves Aouar. Whether he does it and whether he pulls the trigger, I think that depends on the scope of what he wants to do with.
You said he changed agencies and all that.
Yeah, it's going to look in general about what we want to do. After the striker and the big center mid that we want, there's going to be a third signing, and that's going to be your feasible one, like your low one, your little depth one. I really see that in this window.
Would you accept so you're saying like Declan Rice plus Aouar, but would you accept Fabian Ruiz plus Aouar? Would you accept it?
I'd be upset. Then I want us to go massive at striker. Then you're talking like a João Felix. Like there's certain things that you would want in that aspect. Like in theory, those two kind of work, but they're not quite the same profile. Like Ruiz is very different to Declan
Well,
Rice.
I would get
but-
them like both because they're such different profiles. And then Awar can play so many different positions. And I think we lack a utility player that can play in the front line and in midfield. But that's a conversation for another day. I think it's almost time for another squad building pod. I think
I think
it's
people
time.
want it.
It's time. But yeah, you guys, let's end it here. I know some of you guys are asking about Watford. Tomorrow will be the match preview for that. So I'll let you guys know. If you guys are not following SheKnowsArsenal on Twitter, make sure that you guys do that. And if you're not on Twitter, subscribe so that you guys know when we go live. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Make sure that you guys follow George and Souls on Twitter. Those are their names up there. I'm Justino Tweets and at SheKnowsArsenal, George V_AFC and at Gunnar Souls. Yeah, this was a lot of fun. We have improved. Bam! Like, you know what I mean? We have improved. Like, we just have. Like, you know what I mean? Let's not even start talking about Jude Bellingham, you guys. You guys are just in dream mode. All right, guys. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye. Jude.